So it's my birthday today, and every year one of the things I tend to do is I tend to reflect on what has gone well and what hasn't gone so well, okay? And one of the things I thought about this year is, having been in business for a while now, what are the things I would share with someone who was newly starting their business? Like, you're going into the very first year of your business. What are the things you should be looking out for? And I'm going to be sharing some of these things, both from the perspective of someone who's been in business for a few years now, and also from the perspective of someone who works with business owners. Being an accountant in the UK, I work with business owners who are at different stages in their business. So the first thing I'll say is, don't be too quick to write off a business idea as being a profitable business or a loss-making business. Now, ultimately, I think this does also come down to what type of business it is you're running, okay? But I think generally, a lot of people start businesses and they're very quick to kind of classify that business as, a loss-making, or, basically a business that's not worth it, too quickly. And I'm saying they do this too quickly because when you first start running your business, your first year, you don't have enough data, okay? You don't know what particular seasons your clients will come in. You don't know what particular months are best for doing certain activities within your business. So that's what I mean by, you simply don't have enough data. By the time you have finished the first year of your business, you will have enough data then to say, okay, well, in my first year of business, I noticed that between March to June was when I typically made my highest sales, and between June to September were the slowest months in my business. Now, what you can do is you can take that lesson that you've learned in your first year and apply it in your second year to see how you can, basically perform better in your second year and subsequent years. So from that angle, I would say, don't be too quick to write off a business idea, too soon, okay? The second thing I would say is, when you first start your business, a lot of things you are going to have to learn and you're going to have to do independently. Now, does this mean you have to learn and do everything by yourself? I would say no. I would say it is important for you to choose wisely the things you want to bootstrap, okay, i.e. do yourself for as little cost as possible, and the things that you want to actually get expertise on. Okay, so for instance, if you're starting your business, I would typically say you need to at least ensure that you have sought financial advice. You've probably sought legal advice, depending on the type of business it is you're running. It doesn't apply to everybody. But these are not things that you can typically bootstrap, because later on down in your business, you might find that you did things so wrong and you end up spending far more money to correct it than if you had sought the advice of an accountant or lawyer or someone who is an expertise within that particular field, okay? However, saying that, there are lots of things that you will need to factor in mind when you start in business, okay? So be ready to learn social media marketing, for instance. Be ready to learn how to, maybe create a website if that's something that appeals to you. Sometimes people will just kind of hire these kind of things out. Another thing I would say to be watchful of in your first year of business, and I think it takes a lot of people by surprise, is that you don't actually realize how lonely the world of entrepreneurship can be sometimes, okay? Because at the end of the day, you're doing many of these things by yourself. Unless you have other entrepreneurs around you who have typically done what it is you're doing, or who are in business themselves, then you might feel a bit demotivated, maybe even demoralized that, no one really understands what I'm doing, what I'm going through. Maybe those around me are not entrepreneurs like myself. So it can feel sometimes a little bit lonely in the first year. So to this, I will say, try and make sure you surround yourself with other business owners. It might be that you're in a space, you're in a field where naturally you work with other business owners anyway, okay? Like, for instance, I tend to work with business owners every day. So for me, that doesn't apply really. But what I will say is, if you're in a business space or in your field and you don't typically tend to relate too often with other business owners, then it can feel very daunting. It can actually feel like you don't have anyone who you can share the pitfalls and, good times of being in business with. Now, the next thing I want to say is something that I think a lot of people actually miss out on, especially if they end up stopping that business or quitting that business too soon, okay? And this is the fact that your first year will often look like you haven't made a lot of money, okay? But I think, especially, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you've been in business for, 2, 3, 4 years, you can put some comments down in the comment section on what your thoughts are regarding this. But typically, your revenue is not going to look the same every single year, okay? There is no direct correlation between how much you earn in year 1, in year 2, in year 3, okay? So you would typically find that when you're in the world of business, the amount of money that you can make in your business, depending on the type of business, depending on how hard, of course, it is you're working in that business, the growth in terms of income and in terms of revenue will typically be quite exponential. So you really cannot tell with precision that, okay, this business is not worth it in year 1. Now, the next point is going to be the fact that I would typically steer away from product-based business ideas and try to focus primarily on having a service-based business idea. Now, I know that people might be in two thoughts around this, but I'm saying this plainly because I have seen, okay, I work with different types of business owners, and to be very honest, on average, you will find that people who run service-based businesses will typically tend to have a higher level of success than those who run product-based businesses. Now, saying that, I'm not saying that product-based businesses are a bad idea. I'm simply saying I think for the foundation of your business, it's always good to have a service-based business idea. By a service-based business idea, I mean a business where you are fundamentally providing services of one type or another to a particular client or customer base, okay? And when you have that as your foundation, there is nothing then stopping you from introducing elements of product-based business type ideas into that model, okay? So I wouldn't actually say you should solely depend on, say, I don't know, selling digital products as a standalone business idea. I do feel like, if I'm honest, there's very few people who are able to make a success of that, and the competition in such a market tends to be extremely high. If you're looking at longevity of your business, you really do need to be thinking about how can you actually create a business that both has components of service-based business and also product-based business in it, okay? So that's going to be my stand. And I think a good example of this might be, say, I don't know, if you're a lawyer or if you're a chef, for instance, and you cook for people. That is the service that you're rendering, right? You're catering to people, but the product-based aspect of it can actually be nicely blended into that business by you maybe making recipe books that you could sell, or maybe you could have, cooking templates or whatever it is, product based that you can link to that particular catering business. So in that sense, you get to have a combination of both service-based business idea in that business model and also, the product-based side of it as well. It's going to be so important for you to be open-minded on this journey, just because there are so many ups and downs. And if you're someone who is not typically open-minded to try new things, to be creative along the way, it's going to feel more challenging than it really ought to. Now, for instance, a classic example of this might be where you start your business and you're like, well, I'm not a social media person. I just don't do social media. Well, typically, a lot of people, a lot of business owners are using social media. So if you're automatically closing that door, then that is going to hinder you significantly. There are other times where I've come across business owners that are like, no, my business idea simply cannot work in this market. Well, how do you know that? Have you tested it? Have you gotten statistics on what works and why it doesn't work? So you do need to be open-minded when it comes to trying your business idea, marketing your business idea, getting the data from that business before you come to a final conclusion on what will work and what will not work. Now, I'd really like to get your thoughts. If you're someone who has been in business for a while now, what are some of the key things that you would share and add to this video to someone who is newly starting in business, and why?